the interest with the Baltimore Ravens has been about Lamar Jackson, their quarterback, who right now is a free agent. They tagged him with a non-exclusive franchise tag earlier this offseason. And there's been a bunch of teams that have been talked about, hey, this team would make sense for Lamar, whether it's the Atlanta Falcons or the Carolina Panthers or the Miami Dolphins. All these teams have come out and said, hey, we're not really interested. But there is one team that has not said anything and is picking near the top of the draft in need of a quarterback, and that's the Indianapolis Colts. And Michael, you wrote about this on VSiN.com, thinking that this could be the perfect marriage, Lamar in Indy.
Well, what I said was, the way I wrote it was, look, sometimes Occam razor was developed by a 14th century monk, William, a friar named William. And basically the philosophy is if there are two complex problems, the simplest solution is usually the best. And so the Colts' complex problem is simply this. They have to find a quarterback. They're picking fourth. They could not get to one. I don't think they were ready to go to one. And they got outbid by the Carolina Panthers. So now they're sitting at 4, knowing that the Texans are going to. And who can predict Nick Caserio? I can't. I can tell you that. I know him well, but I can't predict him. I have no idea where he's going. And so, but he looks on paper that he needs to get a quarterback. Yep. And he needs to take whichever one the Panthers don't take, Stroud or Young. And so for me, now where does that leave the Colts? Taking a chance on Will Levis? I don't see that. I know that the worldwide leader loves Will Levis. That there's a lot of people in the league that aren't that way. Take a chance on Anthony Richardson? It's a huge chance. It's a huge gamble. It's got great upside, but it has tremendous risk. The risk reward on Anthony Richardson is really, really too high for the 4th pick overall in the draft. So if you're Chris Ballard, where are you going to get your answer? You didn't go after Rodgers. Probably right thing to do. You didn't go after Garoppolo. You're not on a trade market. The owner has come out and said very clearly you're tired of retreads. So for me, the simple solution is because you do have a good team, because you do have cap room, because you play in a dome, like you could make this work on a 3-year deal. And what I would say, to me, one of the things the general manager must do, and Ernie Accorsi, who I was with in Cleveland, talked about this at length to me all the time. The general manager has to protect the franchise. He has to protect. That's his main job, is to protect the franchise. And if you're Chris Ballard, you have to protect the franchise. What does that mean? That means you got to get your butt on an airplane and fly to Miami and spend time with Shane Steichen and Lamar Jackson and Mama Jackson. And you got to spend time and you got to figure out if this could work before you just say it can't work. Right? You owe it to the franchise to do all the due diligence. And then when you collect the data, and I'm not talking about just going down there for an hour and flying back. I'm not talking about going to get a Popeye sandwich and come back. I'm talking about spending time, 3, 4, really get to know the kid, get to know the situation, understand what has transpired in Baltimore to cause this discontent. And then come back to your owner and say, here's what we should do based on the evidence that we've collected, one way or the other. That's, to me, protecting the franchise. And that's what you should do. And that's what Chris Ballard should do. Because rarely does a quarterback who's won the MVP become available in the open market. Now, you could say, well, he's not very good. He can't throw. Look, I don't understand the constant badgering of Lamar Jackson. Yeah. He's a good player. Is he should he get paid as much as Dak Prescott? Absolutely. Should he get paid more than Deshaun Watson? He's better. Yeah. Is he Patrick Mahomes? I'm not saying he's there. But there are things that he could do that are so unique. I know he's been hurt the last 2 seasons. But I think a lot of that is you could curtail that by what you run offensively. And you have Shane Steichen, this young coach who's never been a head coach before. I mean, you got to have some way to develop the quarterback. And where are you going for the solution if you don't do this? You're waiting for next year? Because if you wait for next year, there'll be another GM picking that player.
I think that's a really fair point there for the Indianapolis Colts. And you mentioned how rarely does this ever happen, that a young quarterback who's won an MVP available on the open market for teams to talk to. This is never the case because typically that guy gets locked up by their current franchise, and then you never hear from them because that franchise never wants to move on from those guys. But this is an extenuating circumstance here with Baltimore and Lamar kind of breaking down in the negotiations. What do you think would be required for Indianapolis? Like, let's say they go down there, they have a good meet. Lamar and Ballard, they meet, they say, hey, we like each other. Let's make this thing happen. What's the next step then for Chris Ballard? Is it calling Eric DeCosta and the Baltimore Ravens and saying, all right, let's work together. What do you guys want in terms of compensation?
Yeah, I think that's the call. You say, look, Eric, I'm going to give you the 4th pick overall. That's all I'm going to give you. Now, DaCosta will tell him to go to hell and hang up the phone. But DaCosta knows that might be the only deal he has out there, and he may have to take it. He'll call back. He will call back. And so I think that's what you have to do. You've got to, you can get this for less than 2-1s. You could, because they don't want to take the burden on. Look, everybody says next year it'll be easier. No, it won't be easier next year because his cap number is going to go up. His cap number is going to go way up. It's going to make it very difficult for them. So to me, if I'm Ballard, that's what I would do. I would call and try to see if I can make a deal with the Ravens. I think the Ravens are at wit's end with this situation. I think they're saying, look, we offered them $144 million, and that was $133 million. That wasn't enough. We're never going to get an answer to this. So to me, you've got to strike while the iron's hot. You've got to do this to go forward. And I think that this is what Ballard has to do. Now, all I'm saying simply is this: go collect the data, protect the franchise, protect the franchise. Because if you don't, where are you going?
Any concern trading him inside the conference if you're Baltimore?
Well, I mean, if it's the 4th pick overall in the draft, I mean, I don't know how you can't pick and choose. Nobody else is calling. Your phone's not ringing.
You asked me what would happen to the Indianapolis Colts odds if they were to acquire Lamar Jackson this offseason. Because right now, at our show sponsor, BetMGM, the Colts are 100-1 to win the AFC, 200-1 to win the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not an odds
What are they to win the South?
To win the South, let me look this up here real quick. To win the AFC South, the Colts are 7-1. So
yeah. But that's actually shocking. They're that low at 7-1. But I think probably because the Texans are only 8.5-1. That's remarkable, right? Maybe that, but I would have thought they would at least been 10-1. So my question back to you is, we know this, right? This is something I've learned working for 5 years for VSiN, that if I ever went back in the league, which I'm never going to do, but I do think that Vinny and Chris Andrews and Thomas Gable, those guys power rank teams, they know it. And so when they put a number out, when they adjust the number based on a player, you should pay attention to it. Now, once they do it, don't pay attention anymore, right? Don't pay it, because then the money's moving around. So that's just based on John Q. Public. But once he posts this number, if they sign Lamar, I think that would go down to a 2-2. I think they would jump ahead of the Titans. They'd be 2-1, right?
100%.
And I think their odds, he would move. My point here is he would move the needle. And if you're going to sign a player and pay him a lot of money, let him move the needle. And we've seen that all these signings in free agency, no one's moved the needle with the exception of Aaron Rodgers, who moved the needle before, and the book got ahead of it in case people were going to bet the Jets. So when you look at it in that landscape, it really becomes compelling. Why don't you do this?
Yeah, it just goes to show you that not everybody, and we're shuffling things around inside the house, but we're not really changing the house. It's kind of what it is.
Right.
It's
exactly.
like you can change the furniture, but the house is still going to be the house. Now, you can move into another house, which is Aaron Rodgers going to the New York Jets, which is still pending right now, but we all believe that that's what's going to happen later on this offseason, and that will actually move the odds. And like you mentioned, the books, they're very sharp with this stuff. They say, all right, we see that everybody is talking about Rodgers to the Jets. Let's go ahead and move those odds right now before this even happens, because nobody wants to get caught with the whole Brady situation where Tampa was out there at 60-1 and 40-1, and then all of a sudden he signs there, and it's like, oh my God, like people have bet big money on these long shot tickets knowing that Brady's going to go to Tampa. Then all of a sudden now they're 12-1 before the season starts. So the books have definitely become more clever with this.
Right. So why do the books want to hire people that are in the news business that report accurate information? Because they want to get ahead of the curve, right? And so for me as an executive, if there's a player that carries a point spread value to him, then he should get paid. He's one of the guys you pay. So he would qualify for me in the non-replaceable player. A replaceable player doesn't move the needle. Now, he may help you win, but he doesn't move the needle. But if you're going to pay 45 or 50 million to a player, he better move the needle.
Yeah.
He better move the needle. And Lamar's going to move the needle for the Colts. He would move the needle tremendously for Atlanta. I think Atlanta would become the favorite in the North, in the South, in the NFC.
Yep.
I wouldn't be shocked if The Colts went to, what would challenge the Jags. I mean, the guy to me, he moves the needle. So if I were in the league, that would be, look, it's the old saying, what do they know that we don't know? He moves the needle. Why aren't we interested in this? And if we don't sign anybody, it's really, like you said, we're just redecorating. We're not remodeling.
Yeah. It's that 200-1 right now at BetMGM. If he were to go to the Colts, my guess is that 30-1 is what you see Indianapolis to win the Super Bowl. 25, like they would be close to Jacksonville right there. You would see kind of a co-favorite situation in that AFC South division because he is that good of a quarterback.
I agree. He moves it. So if you're Chris Ballard, once again, protect the franchise, protect the future of the franchise. You know that. And I'm not saying they're going to bet that. This is not about betting. This is about the value of a player. Mm-hmm. And essentially, as a general manager, that's what you do. You set value on players. You pay players based on their value. You pay players based on their ability to help your team and move the needle. I used to walk into Al Davis's office and I'd say, we should sign player Y. And he would say, how much better is player Y than the player we have? And I would say, he is better. He said, I'm not interested in getting a little better. I'm interested in getting a lot better. And that's a very, very interesting statement to make, because when he made that statement to me, I didn't agree with him. I always was looking for incremental value in terms of improvement. Mm-hmm. But when you flavor in, have to teach the player, the guy has to learn, all of a sudden, if you're signing a 58 to replace a 57, you're really not doing much. What we need is a 63 grade-wise. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, where the Colts are.
Yeah. And also when you factor that in, it's like that player who's a 58 might not even be a scheme fit. And it's like all these things that if a 58 is not a scheme fit, maybe they play at a 54 or 55, and then now you're just kind of chasing your tail there. So yeah, I think it's Lamar. He continues to be the most fascinating domino this offseason because we all believe that Rodgers is going to the Jets. Lamar is the next thing that could actually move the needle and shake up the NFL landscape. We'll see if it happens or when it happens. Right now, we're just sitting in limbo.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.